Have you ever seen a creator audit their fantasy football advice from an entire season? Well, lucky for you, I wanted to know the exact same question that I'm sure you all ask yourselves every time I post a video. Does this guy have any idea what he's talking about? So, I was curious about the same question, so let's take a few minutes to review all 47 of my specific Dynasty takes from this offseason and this season and figure out if I truly do have any idea what I'm talking about. I'm going to give each take one of three labels. The good takes are going to get a green check mark, the red takes are going to get a red X, and the middling takes, which didn't really matter either way, they weren't good, they weren't bad, they just kind of were what they were, will get a yellow equal sign. And then I have an extra symbol, an extra label, if a take was both spot on and one that paid off extremely well if you took that advice. I will also notate that with a bullseye symbol. If you are interested in a free team review, check out my free Discord in the description. I spend 20 to 30 minutes on each review and give a detailed write-up with dozens of specific trade suggestions. So if you're interested in that, check that out in the description. But other than that, let's just go ahead and get into the Dynasty takes. Starting off with the first video that I ever posted, uploaded in March, was a player analysis on Chase Brown. And in that video, I correctly predicted that even if Samaje Perine was the only other back available in Cincinnati, if Zach Moss didn't come back, if Cincinnati didn't draft a high-profile rookie running back, then Brown would still have his workload and his snaps limited. And of course, that is what we saw come to fruition here in the 2025 season. The next thing that I predicted is that in isolation, Chase Brown really wasn't a great NFL talent, not a great NFL running back, and wouldn't be productive unless the Bengals offense was performing at a high level. And again, like we saw in the first few weeks of the season when the Bengals were struggling, Chase Brown was highly ineffective. However, again, we of course saw that when Flacco took over the offense and we had a little bit more life to the Cincinnati Bengals offense, Chase Brown did go back up in efficiency. But at the end of the day, really, he is not a guy like Bijan Robinson, where if the offense isn't performing, Bijan can still get there because he's a great talent. Chase Brown, on the other hand, is a guy where I just really feel like he needs to be in that really good situation in order to be efficient and productive. And so for those two, I'm going to go ahead and give 2 green check marks, 2 good takes for that. And then, of course, we have the late season Chase Brown, where I also posted another video in between weeks 14 and week 15, which was more of just a player discussion on Chase Brown, where he was at, and what we could expect heading into the playoffs. And with both Higgins and Perine being healthy in the offense, we expected Chase Brown's workload to regress, to be reduced. And up until weeks 15, 16, 17, Chase Brown really had just been a volume-based play. He wasn't having huge explosive plays. He wasn't scoring a ton of touchdowns. And so if he wasn't getting a large workload, then the expectation was that his production would regress and would decrease. However, of course, we saw that during the fantasy playoffs, Chase Brown blows up. He scored 5 touchdowns in 2 games. And so that's an L, bad take in doubting Chase Brown and the Cincinnati Bengals. And so breaking this down just a little bit more, I think that I had some take lock. I saw that Chase Brown's workload was going to regress, which it did, which, that did turn out to be correct. But players that are in good offenses, good players in good offenses can still be significantly fantasy productive on a limited workload. We see that with a guy like Travion Henderson down the stretch this year, where he's been very productive. We saw that in 2024 with Jahmyr Gibbs. And so I think that I got a little bit of take lock, and I just didn't respect the situation that the Bengals, were going to put up 40 some odd points each week down the stretch. Even though he had a limited workload, the Bengals were just like giving it to these teams, the Arizona Cardinals, the Miami Dolphins, where it felt like the Bengals were just taking out their frustration at another lost season on these poor teams that were just trying to, as gracefully as possible, make it to the offseason. And because of that, the Bengals were putting up 6+ touchdowns in these performances. And then the other thing is that although Chase Brown is very ineffective inside like the 5-yard line, and he doesn't produce many explosive plays that get him touchdowns from the middle of the field outside of the red zone, there is still a portion in between the 5-yard line and like the 20-yard line that exists. And I didn't really take this into account when projecting out Chase Brown's red zone upside. And the Bengals found out that Chase Brown, hey, he's not good inside the 5, but what we can do is at the 10-yard line, at the 15-yard line, we can give him screen passes. We can give him some outside rushes. And he actually is good at those and good in those areas. And he has more touchdown upside and red zone upside than I originally gave him credit for. And so for those reasons, he scored those touchdowns, had some spike weeks, and really paid off for players in the fantasy playoffs. For this Chase Brown discussion number 2, I will give 1 green check mark because of accurately projecting his workload. But at the same time, Chase Brown just got it done. The Bengals obliterated the Arizona Cardinals, obliterated the Miami Dolphins in these just absolutely horrendous blowout wins, and it really benefited Chase Brown. So, bad take. I take that, and I'm going to try and be better moving forward. Next up, we have a video where it's titled, "You're drafting the wrong players in the first 3 rounds of Dynasty Startups." Published this back in April, and really what this video is trying to identify that certain players in the first 3 rounds, those top 36, are really just the highest value tiers of Dynasty assets, are much more likely to retain value than other assets in that tier. Long story short, the more established cornerstone players are, on average, better bets long-term instead of those players that are new to the top 36, that are new to those higher value tiers. The video acknowledges that there, of course, will be some of those rookies and players who get elevated into those top tiers that will go on to be consistently high-end assets, but that on average, the established veterans usually come out on top. They are just more likely to retain that high level of value than those other players. Historical trends data, right? Like all these things. That video was advocating for guys like Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Bijan Robinson, Devon Achane, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Nico Collins, over players like Drake May, Caleb Williams, Brian Thomas Jr., Brock Bowers, and Marvin Harrison. With, Drake May, he is really the only guy that increased in value. And so, of course, missed out on getting Drake May with this philosophy. However, you also missed out on Caleb Williams, who his value has been up and down. BTJ, whose value has decreased significantly. Bowers, whose value has decreased significantly. But then guys like Mahomes, Herbert, Achane, Amon-Ra, I feel like have all kind of gained value to an extent. Nico Collins, of course, is aging. He's lost a little bit of value, but just on average, the veteran players were better picks than these rookie players. And so with this particular video, with these particular takes, this is really why I was so low when I was fading Brian Thomas Jr., because he was going over guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, like Nico Collins, like Drake London, where we just had a longer track record of talent and performance from those players. And so I've referenced that BTJ was a fade for me pretty much all season, mentioned that in multiple videos. And this is why, is because he was just being valued over all of these other established cornerstone veteran players. And so for this video, of course, we missed on Drake May, missed out on having, that value increase from him. But again, the video acknowledged that we would miss out on maybe 1 or 2 of these guys every season. However, on average, we were going to come out ahead, which I think has played out well for this 2025 offseason. There's a lot of different players and takes that this video went into. And so I'm just going to go ahead and give this 3 green check marks. Just because there were multiple players here, multiple takes were born from this specific video, and it's my Dynasty Audit video. So if you think that's unfair, let me know, but I will give myself another three good takes, 3 green check marks for that video. Next up, we have a less serious, more fun video where I was talking about the absolute cheapest veteran production that you could find in Dynasty that could have a possibility of slotting into your roster and giving you some production. Published this in mid-June before we had any idea who the Colts starting quarterback was going to be. And leading off, we have Daniel Jones as the first player, and you could get him for like 2 third-round picks in the trade market. And if you really wanted to get him, it was like sending a second-round pick and then getting Daniel Jones and a third back, and that got it done in most leagues. And so Daniel Jones, huge value win. I go into all the reasons why I was so confident in him in this video itself, but of course, we know huge value win, and I'm going to give this take a bullseye. And then listing off the rest of the players, we have Christian Kirk, bad take, Adam Thielen. I'm going to give that like an equals mark. He got traded to the worst wide receiver situation in the NFL. Zach Moss, my understanding is that the neck injury just really kept him out of the NFL, off the field in 2025. I'm going to give that just a yellow equals sign because the injury. Austin Eckler, I give this one a green check mark. It was looking good before he went down with a season-ending injury. And then Zach Ertz, even with everything that was going wrong with the Washington Commanders, he was still fantasy productive, especially in tight end premium leagues, enough to be either a tight end that you could stream or a flex option that you could throw in if you needed it with bye weeks or injuries. And then Tyler Conklin on the Chargers, he had been fantasy productive with the Jets for many years. Unfortunately, he just got buried under all these different pass catchers in Los Angeles. But red X for Tyler Conklin ended up being a bad take. And so for this video, the whole premise was like, these guys are dart throws. Maybe you get something out of them. There was absolutely no expectation that more than 2 or 3 of these guys would hit in any meaningful way. And that's really what happened with this. I mean, Tyler Conklin, I think Adam Thielen, guys that I was finding on the waiver in the offseason in different leagues. So I think this video did turn out pretty much like we expected, pretty well. So I'm just going to give this like 1 green check mark because there were wins, there were, whatevers, and then there were some losses on this video. But that's really what we expected with this specific group of players. If you think that's unreasonable, that I should give myself a couple of red X's for these guys that missed from this video, then let me know down in the comments. I'm totally open to that if you guys think that is something that is more reasonable. Next up, we have the Odunze player analysis video. In this video, we talk about catchable target rate and how it was low. A lot of people noticed that and identified that as a problem and why Odunze wasn't particularly productive in his rookie season. But I was able to look at catchable target rate trends over time and figure out that it was very unlikely that Caleb Williams would be able to provide a significantly higher catchable target rate based on Odunze's ADOT in 2025, because quarterbacks can get better over time, but it's something that only changes by a couple of percentage points every year. Even if the quarterback is getting better, it's not something that's going to jump up by 10 or 15%. Really projected out the catchable target rate and that it would cause Rome to be very inefficient. And so because of that, I was fading Odunze pretty hard this offseason. Looked like it was going to be a bad take early on. And then, of course, we know what happened throughout this 2025 season. This video also, in the analysis of Odunze versus JSN, it led me to be much higher on JSN than the consensus. And this video, I was begging people, really recommending, take Odunze and just trade him for JSN, right? Add a second round pick if you have to. Add some like low value player that's equal to like a second round pick. Add that to Odunze and just go and get JSN, because they were valued and they were being drafted so close together, sometimes only like 5 or 6 spots apart in these dynasty startups. And really, why I was so high on JSN is because we knew that he was a reliable, high target kind of player, but there were questions about, what were his ceiling. But looking back in the 2 or 3 game series where DK Metcalf was out in 2024, we actually saw JSN be incredibly effective down the field. And because it was such a small sample size, I feel like a lot of people missed that. And so I was actually projecting JSN and his ADOT to increase, his yards per catch to increase. There's multiple takes here. I'm going to give it like 3 green check marks and a bullseye because, of course, if you could have moved Rome Odunze for JSN this offseason, that would have been just an absolutely massive value win that would have significantly helped your dynasty rosters win championships. And so I'm going to go ahead and give like these takes in general, in a conglomerate, a bullseye mark as well, and then 3 green check marks. Now we're getting into videos that I posted in the actual dynasty season. After week 3, I had some buys and sells. And so this video is titled Spicy Dynasty Buys and Sells. So the buys were George Pickens, Christian Kirk, Deebo Samuel, Bryce Young, and Daniel Jones. Pickens, Deebo, Bryce Young, and Daniel Jones, all good takes. Bryce Young at that time, even though he's not a very exciting player, after the first few weeks, everyone was super worried about Bryce Young. He was going for like nothing on the trade market. Everyone wanted to get rid of him. People thought he was going to get benched again. And so even though like obviously Bryce Young wasn't like a huge win or anything, if you could have gotten in on him at that price, or at least not panic sold on him, you could have had a usable starting super flex quarterback for the rest of the season. And then of course we know George Pickens turned out well, Deebo turned out well, Daniel Jones turned out well until his injury. The only red X from this set of players is going to be Christian Kirk. I wanted to point out George Pickens as being another candidate for a bullseye. And then moving on to the sells, we have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle kind of grouped into one. Egbuka, Rome Odunze again, Caleb Williams / Drake May, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith grouped together as well. And so for Tyreek and Waddle, Tyreek, of course, gets injured. People are super excited about Waddle, and Waddle still just doesn't really do anything. Next up is Egbuka. I was, telling you to sell him. He had a bunch of touchdowns, was overproducing, and realistically, all he could do was go down from that point, from those first hot couple of weeks. And what do you know? Things got worse. He suddenly didn't have the highest efficiency in the entire league, wasn't scoring a ton of touchdowns, and his value has dropped considerably. And so if you could have gotten out on him around his peak value, which is when this video was posted, that would have been a fantastic move to make. And so I think this also deserves a red bullseye. And same thing with Rome Odunze. This really feels unsustainable. He had 4 touchdowns in 3 games. Luther Burden and Colston Loveland weren't even on the field. The run game was absolutely anemic. Just there were so many things that could go wrong for Rome Odunze, and honestly, kind of all of them did. And that's why he had that historic downfall. And so I think this take as well deserves another bullseye, because if you could have gotten off of Rome Odunze, whether we're talking dynasty, redraft, whatever, at his peak, after the week 3-ish game, that would have been just a massive value win, massive production win as well, if you could have made a move like that. And then we have Caleb Williams, Drake May as sells. And really, this was a very specific situation where I was like, you should just take Caleb Williams or Drake May and turn them into Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert. This was really based off of that previous video where I'm like, these high-end assets, just get those safer guys. It's just gonna be better long-term. On average, just move over to these safer assets. I'm gonna give this one a yellow equal sign, because even though Drake May, is now the Dynasty 101, if you could have gotten Justin Herbert plus or Patrick Mahomes plus for Drake May at this time, which is what was happening on the market, then I think that is more of an even trade than a loss. And then of course, if you could have moved Caleb Williams before his value dipped and gotten something on top of Justin Herbert, or just moved laterally to Patrick Mahomes, I think that was also a good thing to do. And then A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, I'm going to give that another yellow equals sign, because both of them were productive at points in the season. This is early enough in the season where, A.J. Brown still had a month and a half where he only had one actually good game, and then he came on hot late in the season. And so both Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown provided value. They were productive. Again, I think that this is more of a middling take. If you made a move based on this, it didn't really help, it didn't really hurt, it just kind of was what it was. Next up, we have the tight end premium video where I talk about the elite tight ends that are overhyped in tight end premium formats and just the math on how the large score lines for these elite tight ends and tight end premium get people really excited, but realistically, the math doesn't really line up with how much they help your team. This is more of a working take kind of video, like a long-term take, I should say. I don't think that there's really anything that we can exactly take away from the 2025 season, right? Like Trey McBride was really good and paid off for teams, but then Brock Bowers in his situation, he really didn't pay off. So there's not really a take to pull away from like the larger aspect of the video yet. We can see down the road whether or not having these elite tight ends really pay off year after year, if they live up to their price, etc. But the take from this video is that I was stating that McBride was the better tight end to have in Dynasty over Brock Bowers. Felt like we were projecting forward a ton on Brock Bowers, and there was absolutely no guarantee that he wouldn't regress and do worse. And we had just a longer track record of McBride being fantasy productive and could be more confident in his continued production, especially in his situation. And so, of course, McBride comes out and has a historic tight end season. And so I'm going to give this take a green check mark. Next up, we have a lot of takes here. The Week 10 kind of Dynasty updates video. I had some risers, guys that I was high on: Devon Achane, Christian McCaffrey, Chris Olave, Javonte Williams, Pacheco, and Alec Pierce. Achane was a good take. McCaffrey is a good take. Olave was a good take. Javonte Williams, he kind of slowed down towards the end of the season, and he's someone who has kind of went up in value but then retained the value moving into this offseason so far. And so I'll give him more of like a yellow equal sign. Let me know if you disagree with that, though. And then Pacheco, red X for him. His snap share was increasing, but then in the middle of the season, but then he had another injury that really slowed down his return. So I was excited about Pacheco, but that injury really kind of derailed it. And then we have Alec Pierce that I said was a buy as well. I'm gonna leave this as good because we saw Pierce being productive. People were excited about him and his talent, how he's gotten better in the season, but his dynasty price just hadn't really reflected that increase in production and that increase in perception. And so even though the Colts kind of broke down, I feel like people are now still going to be more excited about Alec Pierce, have him ranked higher in dynasty than they did during this Week 10 video. And then for the sells, I had Justin Jefferson, Caleb Williams, Garrett Wilson, Cortland Sutton, and Alvin Kamara. For Justin Jefferson, everyone had been moving off of him towards the tail end of the season, but the thing here is that at this time, this was, again, still when Jefferson hadn't completely bottomed out on his value during the 2025 season, and so you realistically could have moved laterally on him to a guy like Amon-Ra or Lamb at this time. You probably could have gotten a plus on top of Rashee Rice or Drake London, and so I'm going to give this take another bullseye, because I was advocating for moving off of Justin Jefferson at like 3 or 4 weeks before everyone else was just kind of completely done with him for the 2025 season. Of course, now I'm optimistic about Jefferson moving into 2026, but it would have been a good value win at the time, helped you win championships if you could have moved off of Jefferson before his value really tanked this season. And then Caleb Williams, I mean, he's somebody that I just wasn't confident in at this point in the season. And I think that his value and his production has just kind of stayed pretty similar. So I'll give this like a yellow equal sign. If you moved off of Caleb Williams around Week 10, I don't think that really helped you or hurt you. And then Garrett Wilson, I think that this was a good take as well. But Cortland Sutton, he's somebody that I advocated for moving off of at price. Just being a aging veteran who wasn't giving you difference-making production, wasn't really someone that I wanted on my roster, and he just kind of continued to do the same thing down the stretch. Had some good games, had some bad games, but I'll call that a good take. And then moving off of Alvin Kamara, before there was the Kamara injury, all those things, not going to victory lap like an injury to Kamara or anything like that, but just the fact that people were still valuing him like he was like in the low end Dynasty RB2 range, high end RB3, whenever he was very obviously at the tail end of his career and he wasn't producing. Like, he was not a significant producer. He was not giving you difference making production in any way, shape, or form. And same thing with Cortland Sutton is if I have a guy who is very obviously going to decrease in value, and he's not giving me difference making production, if I can, I don't want that player. I want to get off of that player. So same idea, good take there as well. Moving over to the sell candidate for this video was Saquon Barkley, and I think that this was a good call as well. People were really hoping for a end of season Saquon bounce back, which, he was fine. He was productive, like a low end RB1, high end RB2, but again, it's not really what we wanted from Saquon. We wanted like top 3 running back numbers from him, and he just didn't really provide. And so I think moving off of him at that price around week 10, where people were really talking about and really hoping for a Barkley resurgence, calling him a buy on many of the videos that I saw, I was advocating for him as a sell. I was just very worried about this offense and the situation. And so I think that is a good take. And then the buy was Hampton, a little slow coming back off the injury, but I give this a good take as well. His value has bumped back up to pretty much where it was before the injury. And so I believe that is another good take. I honestly think that I was kind of spitting with this one. 10 green check marks, 10 good takes, 1 bad take, and then 2 kind of whatever takes, which was very, very good. Next up, we have the Week 12 Dynasty Updates video, risers, fallers, and then again, another buy and sell. First up, for the risers, I had Nico Collins, Kyren Williams, Ricky Pearsall, Aaron Jones, Byshul Tootin, AJ Barner, and Tyrone Tracy. So Collins turned out well, good down the stretch. We're excited about Houston heading into 2026. Kyren, bad take. Blake Corum continued to eat into the workload, and I'm just really worried about Kyren's production if the Rams were to regress, because previously he's been a volume-based play, and then this year he's been significantly more efficient because the Rams have just been so good as a team. And if the Rams regress, if Stafford gets injured, retires, things change, then I could see Kyren's production falling off a cliff pretty quickly. Next up, Ricky Pearsall. I thought about putting him as a kind of, but I'm going to put this as a good take, because I was saying that I was just excited that he was healthy, being on the field, excited for the future for him. He still looked pretty good even coming off of the injury when you looked at him in isolation. He wasn't really getting much usage in those first games back, and so I wasn't advocating for him as a guy that you could necessarily pick up and plug and play, but that he is a young player who has a ton of upside, and we saw him in weeks 16 and 17 put together some roughly 15-point per game performances. I, again, wasn't advocating for him to be like some league winner down the stretch, more just a value play for dynasty purposes over time. And then we have Aaron Jones, him coming back off of injury. For the price of Aaron Jones at this time, I think that it turned out well. Byshul Tootin got injured. Yellow equals mark. We'll see what happens next year. AJ Barner, he continued to kind of be like a guy that you could stream at tight end. Another guy that was just super cheap. So I'm going to give that a yellow equals mark. He was a cheap guy that was maybe like a stream level tight end, and that's just kind of what he turned out to be. And then Tyrone Tracy, another just yellow equals mark. Like, Tracy did have some usable games if you needed to lean on him and start him in a deeper dynasty format. And so I'll give him another like equal sign. He kind of worked out some games, but we weren't expecting the world at this point from a guy like Tyrone Tracy. Now moving over to the sells, we have Ashton Genty, Rome Odunze, Judkins, McCarthy, Chase Brown, and Matthew Golden. Genty, I think, was a good call at this point because although he had that 31-point game against Houston, people got really excited about it and his talent. Leading up to that game, he had 2 single-digit performances, and then in Week 17, he had another single-digit performance. And so for Genty, it was like, if you need some production now, then I think there are better options for the playoffs, for the last stretch of the season, that you can lean on at the running back position. And with Genty's value, you can actually down tier to like a James Cook, right? Down tier to like a Bucky Irving and a Marion Hampton, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, guys like that I thought would have more production upside. Some of those players in that list didn't pay off. Some of them did, but moving off of Genty at his price, if you were trying to push for a championship, I think was a good call. Odunze again, we've already talked about him, but I'm just going to put that as green checkmark. Good take. Judkins, I mean, I'm going to give him a yellow equal sign. Like, you could say it's a good take, but I mean, really he got injured, so that's I'm not going to, take credit for that in any sort of way. We'll just leave that as a yellow equal sign. And then JJ McCarthy, good take. Fading him. Chase Brown, we already talked about that. Bad take for fading him. And then Matthew Golden, good take for trying to move off of him at that price. He could still come back and, be productive in the future, but his value has dipped towards the end of the season. And then for the buy, Bucky Irving, hoping that he could come back and be productive in the fantasy playoffs for you. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But in terms of value, I think that Bucky is going to be similarly valued to where he was being valued at this time in the offseason. He's still a guy that has a ton of upside. He did give you some usable games, but overall he was disappointing, and so I'll give this a red X, a bad take for Bucky Irving. And then we have Trevor Lawrence was my sell, and this was another bad take after this point in the season. Lawrence really turned it on. The Jaguars turned it on. Lawrence has scored a bunch of rushing touchdowns, so he's paid off down the stretch if you had him on your roster. However, I really don't feel bad about this take whatsoever, because Lawrence was being valued within the tier of like Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, and those guys. And really, even though he's had this good end of the season, now where he's being valued is basically at the top of that tier. And so different people have him different places, but the whole argument with Lawrence was that there was a lot of downside risk with him, but there wasn't really a ton of upside for him to pay off because he was still having a high level of value leading up to week 12 of the 2025 season. And so, of course, this, is an L. I'll take that, but this is just one where I wanted to point out the process. He was a good player to move off of because if he had finished out this 2025 season poorly, he's a guy that could have saw a massive decline in value, but even if he did perform well down the stretch, he wasn't actually going to gain that much value. So around week 13, I posted some Dynasty positional rankings videos. Nothing in particular really stood out here in my rankings besides really like me having Bucky and Hampton high on the running back rankings and having Genty a little low. And we already talked about those. So really, there's just nothing in particular that stood out about these videos as specific takes that I hadn't talked about previously. So I'm not going to make any specific scoring over those videos, but I just wanted to mention them and touch on them. Overall, there were 35 of those green checkmarked good takes, 6 of those red X bad takes, and then 8 of those yellow equals signs, like middling kind of whatever takes that didn't help or didn't hurt. And then of those 35 good takes, I counted 6 bullseyes where they were significant value wins and right on the money. So this actually surprised me because throughout the season, I didn't feel like I was right as often as I was on my takes. And that's just my own perception. I think I really focused too much on the takes that either didn't really pan out or actually went poorly, so I didn't fully appreciate all of the different takes that turned out well. I tried to be as objective as I possibly could with these evaluations, but I know that I'm biased. I'm trying to judge myself and what I did, and so naturally I'm going to look at myself and give myself a little bit more slack than maybe an outside viewer would. So let me know down in the comments which of these takes I labeled incorrectly, or I should go back and double check, do an additional evaluation on. But all in all, I think honestly, for my first season creating content in this Dynasty fantasy football space, I think it went pretty well. And I'm excited to continue to make this content for you all and hopefully help you win your Dynasty leagues in the future.